Welcome to an online training on effective word learning for literacy development. I'm Jodine Smith and I'll be your trainer for today. Think back to vocabulary assignments you had as a student in school. If your experience was like mine, you probably had lists of words you had to look up in the dictionary. Which improved more, your vocabulary or your ability to locate the words in the dictionary? We have learned a lot about vocabulary in the last several decades, especially how to teach it. And in particular, there has been much research showing that vocabulary knowledge is strongly correlated with reading comprehension. Studies have shown that even as early as kindergarten, vocabulary knowledge can predict reading comprehension skills in later years. One study showed a correlation between kindergarten and second grade. Another study showed a relationship between kindergarten and fourth grade, and still another study found a relationship between vocabulary knowledge in first grade that predicted reading comprehension in junior high. The implication is that early vocabulary is very important. In April of 2000, the National Reading Panel released a report that summarized a review of research that supported reading instruction. The report was ordered by Congress to help parents, teachers, administrators, and policymakers identify key skills and methods central to reading achievement. The reading panel recommended vocabulary instruction as one of 5 essential components of an effective reading program. In 2016, a second report came out called Foundational Skills to Support Reading for Understanding in Kindergarten through Third Grade. It summarized a review of research from 2000 to 2014. It also included teaching students academic language skills, including vocabulary knowledge, as one of the recommendations. So let's take a closer look at vocabulary. The dictionary defines vocabulary as a list of collection of terms for use in a language. Or a second definition that is more personal is a collection of words a person knows. But as educators, we know based on our experience with students that vocabulary is more complicated than these definitions imply. The literature on vocabulary tries to address vocabulary by dividing words into categories. One way to think about vocabulary students have is levels of knowledge that range from words that are completely unfamiliar to words that students know well, can explain, and use. But students may have different levels of knowledge of particular words. So another way to think about vocabulary is on a continuum of use. This continuum includes words students need when listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Students may understand a word when they hear a parent use it, however, they may not know it well enough to use in their own writing. So for example, a student may be able to follow the direction, "Tidy up your desk," but may not be able to use the word tidy when speaking, let alone in writing. Noni Lasso expresses this idea when she says, "A lot of kids have a really shallow grasp of a lot of words. It's not that they don't have language, but their depth of word knowledge is too limited to be good readers. You need a good understanding of a word so when you come across it in context, you can conjure up some idea about that word. When students have one very narrow definition of a word, that just doesn't give them enough traction when they are reading independently." We want students to have a firm grip on an abundance of words when listening, speaking, reading, and writing. As mentioned earlier, research indicates a strong correlation of vocabulary with comprehension. But the ultimate measure of a student knowing a word is the ability to properly use it in writing. As we move forward in this training, think about how to help students move to a deeper understanding of words. One of the things that makes teaching vocabulary challenging is that words are complex. Here are some concepts about words that demonstrate their complexity. Words are multidimensional. Readers need to have knowledge of the phonetical structure, what does the word sound like, and the orthographic structure, how the words are spelled. Polysemous means that words can have multiple meanings. Think about the word flat. How many different ways can you use that word? It could be an apartment in London, a flat surface, an off-key musical note, a pair of shoes, or you could be flat broke. Words are also heterogeneous. They are different. They differ in terms of their frequency of use, conceptual difficulty, the level of abstractness, which part of speech they are, their role in text, and their relationship to the content. Finally, words can also be interrelated. It is more difficult to understand the meaning of perpendicular without understanding right angle. The implications of the complexity of vocabulary is that learning, for most words, occurs incrementally. A single exposure to a word does not result in a rich understanding of the word. Encountering it in multiple and varied contexts is necessary for a deep knowledge. Teachers must provide numerous opportunities for students to interact with words in many contexts. And it is the complexity of words that is causing vocabulary issues with many of our students. There are different types of word learning that may need to occur. Students can learn the meaning for a new word that represents an unknown object or concept. Students may already know what a map is, but then learn and understand what a map key is when using a map. They can also learn a new word that represents a known concept. For example, students may understand that basketballs and globes are similar because they are round all the way around, and then learn that the term sphere can be used to label that concept. Students can learn nuances of words. For example, a student may understand the word running, but then learn new words to distinguish the nuances of running, such as jogging, dashing, and sprinting. Finally, students can learn new meanings for a known word. For example, students may know the word ray, as in a ray of sunshine, but then learn the mathematical meaning of the word ray. And in fact, this is the case for many words. Nagy observed that words with multiple meanings are the rule rather than the exception. And Bailey noted that 60 to 70% of English words have multiple meanings. It is, in fact, the multiple meanings of words that are often problematic with activities requiring students to look up vocabulary words in the dictionary. Multiple meaning words are often problematic for students with limited vocabularies, and for our English language learners, too. Students need to learn about 3,000 words per year to keep up with grade level expectations. In order to accomplish that goal, teachers need a plan for helping students learn words. But there is no way to explicitly and effectively teach that many words during a school year. So words must be acquired by students in a variety of ways. Michael Graves suggests the following 4 components of an effective vocabulary program: wide and extensive reading, specific word instruction, teaching independent word learning strategies, and word consciousness and word play activities. We will look at some strategies for vocabulary development and instruction in each of these areas. First, let's take a closer look at the component of wide and extensive reading. Marzano delineates characteristics of a successful wide reading program with the following 8 principles. Students should have access to a wide range of reading materials, including in the classroom, at their desks, at the library, and now most schools can even add digitally. The reading materials should be appealing to students. Topics should be of interest to the age level, and reading levels should range too. The environment needs to be conducive to reading, both when being read to and when students are reading independently. It should be comfortable and free from distractions so that attention can be focused on the book. Teachers should show enthusiasm for books and reading. Teachers can also encourage students in their own reading progress. Teachers need to receive training to understand the why behind a wide reading program. Students should have time for reading when they are not accountable for what they have read. This means that students should be able to just read for pleasure and not to prove that they understand what they are reading. The time should be purely practice. This does not mean that there is never accountability for reading in the classroom, only that there should be some time students can read without the weight of accountability. Fun follow-up activities can be planned after reading some books. This can range from a quick and simple discussion to a craft or an event such as making pancakes. Of course, this is not possible all the time, but fun follow-up activities tie reading to good feelings and make it more enjoyable and desirable for students. Finally, students need distributed time to read. This means that the allocated time is not just one day for a limited number of minutes. The term wide and extensive reading implies a frequency as well as a breadth. Reading should occur throughout the week at identifiable times and show as high a frequency in the classroom as the schedule allows. Students in preschool through second grade are either not reading yet or are beginning readers, and the kinds of words they encounter as beginning readers do not reflect the quality of words we need to expose students to. Therefore, reading aloud to students is crucial for providing access to wide and extensive reading. Although reading aloud is recommended at all grades, as students become better readers, they will need to begin to take on more of the role and responsibility of wide and extensive reading for themselves. Reading aloud to students is valuable for all literacy development. It develops an interest in books and the desire to be a reader. It builds and supports listening and speaking skills, including vocabularies. Reading aloud demonstrates an adult reading fluently. It acts as a bridge to more complex texts that they are not able to read for themselves yet. And, as it relates to our training today, it increases vocabulary development and comprehension growth. There is a lot of evidence that students who read more and are read to more acquire more vocabulary. In 1986, Keith Stanovich borrowed the term the Matthew effect from science, and now it has become well known and associated with reading. The term is based on the biblical saying in the book of Matthew that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. The idea is that the more students read, the better they get at comprehension and reading in general, and the more they will want to read, which just reinforces better comprehension. Integral to comprehension of a text as a whole is comprehension of the words that make up the text. So the same can be said for vocabulary too. The more students read, the better their vocabularies, which just makes them better readers, which encourages reading. Wide and extensive reading encourages word learning. It's not that they learn new words to the depth needed when they first encounter each word. Rather, they experience a cumulative effect of encountering words a number of times and in a number of contexts. Although the numbers are difficult to quantify, let's try based on some of what we know. I'll use conservative figures for some of the unknowns. If a first grader reads and is read to 30 minutes a day for 180 days, and of course the hope is that more than 30 minutes a day is spent reading, that amounts to 10,800 minutes of reading during a school year. Now let's multiply that times an estimate of 60 words per minute, and we'll calculate that students would encounter 648,000 words in books per year. It is estimated that 2 to 5% of the words encountered would be new to students. This gives us a range of 12,960 to 32,400 new words encountered. It is also estimated that students could learn between 5 and 10% of words from reading encounters, which gives us a range of 648 to 3,240 new words learned. Regardless of how you look at the numbers, it is clear that time spent with books can provide a lot of help in acquiring new words throughout the year. We know that the amount of reading that students do is a significant contributor to increased vocabulary. But why? It is well documented that books contain a richer vocabulary than casual conversation. Researchers have identified the 10,000 words we use most often in our language. Words that are more rare, those that are beyond the 10,000 most common words, are encountered more often in books. These are the words needed to understand nuances as well as complex ideas. When adults have conversations with preschoolers, they use about 9 rare words per 1,000 words spoken. Conversations among educated adults contain about 17 rare words. Children's books contain about 30 rare words per 1,000 words. And just in case you were wondering, books for adult readers contain about 52 rare words per 1,000 words written. So naturally, reading exposes students to more rare words. Something interesting to note is that written materials contain proportionally more rare words than all types of television programs and adult speech situations that were studied. Even children's books contain more rare words than any of the oral language situations. A reason for this may be that when speaking, the speaker must quickly draw upon words to use in the situation. When writing, the author has more time to draw upon the precise word needed for the sentence and situation. Thus, authors can be more selective with their word choices. So when reading, or being read to, students are more likely to come across words that are not part of their current vocabularies. Jim Trelease says, "Regular conversation will take care of basic vocabulary, but when you read to a child, you jump into the rare words that help most when it is time for schooling and formal learning." In addition to time, breadth of access is required for students to experience wide and extensive reading. Consider the breadth of materials students have access to in the classroom to read independently, as well as the types of texts that are being read aloud to students. Teachers need to be very cognizant of the range of students' interests and balance that with providing exposure to a wide variety of types of texts. Different vocabulary is used in different genres with different frequencies. An awareness of providing a wide range of texts to students increases the availability of words that are found uniquely or more frequently in each type of text. Make a conscious effort to make a wide variety of reading materials available to students in the classroom. Additionally, consider keeping track of which types of books you read to students. This will help identify holes and allow you to locate reading materials to fill those holes. Providing for a breadth of text both for independent reading and reading aloud to students can provide background knowledge and words for things students have not experienced. Think about a student who has never experienced snow. By reading a book, that student can gain a lot of background knowledge and words associated with the snow. What words might be encountered, like blizzard, icicle, and storm? How do people dress in the snow? They have to bundle up with scarves and mittens. What do people do in the snow? They go sledding, make snowmen and snow angels. What do snowflakes look like? They are made of ice crystals. They are symmetrical and unique. Although reading about the snow can never replace an actual experience with snow, it can provide students with just enough information to help them acquire new words and information that will help them with comprehension when they encounter these words and concepts in other situations. Although reading aloud and the context itself will expose students to a lot of new vocabulary words, Here is a quick tip you can use to assist with word understanding and text comprehension as you are reading aloud to students. PAT stands for 3 quick strategies you can use when reading to quickly incorporate word meanings without severely disrupting the flow of reading. P stands for point. Point to pictures that can support the meaning of a word. A stands for act. Use facial expressions and gestures to show the meaning of a word. T stands for tell. Incorporate a brief definition as you read the sentence. For example, in the book Owl Babies, the PAT strategy can be used while reading. Here is the text from the book. "Mommy," they cried, and they flapped, and they danced, and they bounced up and down on their branch. The words flapped, danced, and bounced can be acted out while reading each word. You could also quickly say that flapped means to move their wings up and down. Finally, point to the branch in the illustration while reading that word. Each of these helps provide for vocabulary development, concept development, and comprehension of the story. So, since we know that reading is so important for vocabulary development, here is a question to ask yourself. How long do you spend reading aloud to students each day? Do you have a number in your head? It may or may not be as long as you think. In 2014, Wright and Newman conducted a study where they observed 600 hours of instruction in 55 kindergarten classrooms. They found that teachers spent an average of 8.36 minutes reading aloud literature each day, and only 1.7 minutes of reading nonfiction text. The quality of the books varied greatly too. If you want to provide students with wide and extensive reading, here is a read aloud challenge for you. Increase the amount of time you are spending reading aloud to your students. Try to read aloud 5 times per day. Now, before you think there is no way to do this because your schedule is already full, remember this does not necessarily mean 5 books a day. Wide reading can range from something quick like a poem, nursery rhyme, or joke, to something that takes longer, like a nonfiction book on sharks. The idea is to increase the time you spend with text with your students. And by the way, one more interesting thing to note about reading aloud is that repeated readings of the same text has been shown to increase both expressive and receptive vocabulary in students. So consider rereading selected texts on topics being studied, as well as classroom favorites. You might want to ask yourself the same question for how much time students spend each day interacting with texts. How long do students spend reading each day? This number will of course vary depending on the age of the students you teach. How's your number? Is it a number that you are satisfied with? Is it a number that matches what the research says about wide and extensive reading? If not, what will you do to increase the amount of time students have with texts, both independently and read aloud to them? If you are satisfied with your number, affirm what you are doing and commit to continuing to make it happen daily in your classroom. The National Reading Panel also identified explicit instruction of vocabulary as a highly effective practice, and this is where specific word instruction relates to an effective vocabulary program. Since the number of words students need to know is so vast, Beck, McCowan, and Amundsen introduced the idea of word tiers to help sort words and narrow them down in order to focus on specific words during instruction. Tier 1 words are basic words that should be in a child's receptive and expressive vocabulary. These are words that occur with high frequency when speaking. Notice I underlined the word should, because of course we know that many students do not even have some of these basic words. Examples of Tier 1 words in the story of the 3 little pigs would include house, pig, and wolf. Tier 2 words occur with high frequency in texts for mature language users. These words should be selected and taught because they are words that are useful to understand the story. They also have high utility in other books and situations. These words occur in high frequency in texts. A Tier 2 word in the story The Three Little Pigs might be the word eldest. Finally, Tier 3 words are content-specific. They are generally more technical in nature and are best learned when they are needed in a specific context. Tier 3 words are less likely to occur in a story of The Three Little Pigs. However, perhaps a more sophisticated version of the story might include the word for a bricklaying tool, the trowel. Okay, it's your turn to try. In which tier would you place the word divide? Well, it was a little bit of a trick question because it depends. If it was not the specific word divide, but the related word share, you might place it in Tier 1. If the word in the context meant to separate or split, it might be a Tier 2 word. If the word divide was being used as a mathematical or geographical term, then that would be a Tier 3 word. So which of these three tiers of words do we want to spend time intentionally teaching? Although students may not know Tier 1 words, they are more likely to pick them up indirectly, even from other students. Tier 3 words can be introduced in context during content area instruction as they are needed. Tier 2 words should be selected for intentional teaching because they are more likely to occur in print, they often need explicit instruction, and it is less likely for students to already know those words, especially at a young age. When selecting Tier 2 words, consider the importance and utility of the word and the necessity to understand the word in order to understand the text. Determine the instructional potential and the student's conceptual understanding of the word as well. Choose words that are not too difficult to explain. And as a reminder, trade books are a great resource for these types of vocabulary words. Since there are far more Tier 2 words than you are able to teach, make a list of candidate words each week. These words will likely come from books that you will read to or with your class during the week. Then, narrow down the candidate words to a final set after careful consideration of which words will give the most mileage to students. Beck recommends that younger students can handle intentional instruction of about 5 words per week, and by 4th grade, up to about 10 words per week. Although teaching those specific Tier 2 words is important, the number that can be taught per week is pretty limiting in terms of quantity, so it really stresses the importance of other ways to develop students' vocabularies. Here is a suggested routine for specific vocabulary words. 1. Provide context for the word from the book. This includes reading the specific sentence the word occurs in, and perhaps surrounding sentences in order to provide context. It also may include looking at any related images such as pictures, photographs, or diagrams that may help students. 2. Have students say the word. 3. Define the word. It is also good to keep in mind that the definition should be accurate, but also child-friendly. Think about how you will define words for your students before you are actually doing it. 4. Provide examples of the word in other contexts. Where else is this word used? How else is this word used? When will students likely encounter or experience the word in their own lives? 5. Invite students to interact with the word in some manner. This can include quickly drawing a visual or identifying a gesture to correspond with the word. More ideas on other ways students can interact with new words will come later in this training. And finally, number 6, have students repeat the word again. Although the routine shown on the previous slide is a way to introduce words, Students should encounter the words in a variety of contexts and situations that encourage processing them. Encounters are needed over several days, for example, over a 5-day cycle. In 2007, a Beck and McCowan study showed that students who received 4 times as many encounters with a word produced twice as much learning. Remember that Lasso estimates that students need between 13 and 15 interactions with the word for them to own the word. So if you are introducing a specific word for the week, make sure you have planned for students to encounter that word over and over and over again. Experiencing a lot of encounters with a word is key to effective vocabulary learning, not just because it helps students with remembering the meaning, but because it helps students bring a word's meaning to mind quickly when they meet the word in a new context. Multiple encounters with a word have created lots of connections, and each represents a context in which students have experienced the word. We want students' brains to be able to retrieve the meanings quickly so that train of thought does not break down when reading. Elfrieda Hebert suggests making semantic webs in order to introduce students to more than 5 to 10 words per week. This method not only exposes students to many words, but also shows the relationships among words. It can be used in all content areas, including with pieces of literature. You will want to provide students opportunities to encounter the word throughout the week. Remember that students need between 13 and 15 encounters with a word. After introducing the word on one day, be sure to return to it on subsequent days to refresh and review the meanings. Students can be presented with opportunities to actively process words by participating in various activities. For example, students can draw a picture of the meaning of the word. Students can respond to a question. For example, for the word startle, you could ask students to describe a time when they were startled, like when my alarm clock went off this morning. Provide examples and non-examples, and have students show thumbs up, thumbs down to show if the vocabulary word would apply. For example, for the word feast, you could say, "Is eating a banana at recess time a feast?" Thumbs down. Is Thanksgiving dinner a feast? Thumbs up. Before we move on to the next component of an effective vocabulary program, let's pause to think of one more type of word that needs specific word instruction. Academic vocabulary are words that students encounter in academic settings. In order to be productive students who are efficient at working in a classroom, students must have a good understanding of words such as group, locate, identify, and select. These are words students are likely to encounter on texts as well. We need to provide students many opportunities to see, hear, and practice these words so they know what to do when they encounter them. Do students know that locate simply means to find? Do they know that select means to choose? Be aware of using these words and use the TAP strategy to help provide support. Academic vocabulary can be encountered in multiple areas of the curriculum. For example, cause and effect can be used when discussing a story plot, but it can also be used to describe science and social studies concepts too. Pay attention to when you encounter the same words in other settings, and point out both the words and the varied settings to students. Focus on 1 or 2 words at a time and consider documenting places students encounter them on a sheet of chart paper that you keep displayed in the room. Add to it as you find examples. Finally, give attention to academic vocabulary that is content-specific. For example, words in language arts such as fiction and nonfiction, details, and dialogue. Each curriculum has its own words that are reoccurring and specific to it. Pay particular attention to these words, ensuring as much support as you can until you are confident that students understand the tasks related to them. But there is no possible way for a teacher to teach every single word unknown to students. So the next component of an effective vocabulary program must be instruction in and modeling word learning strategies. This can give students a toolbox to work with when they encounter new words, especially when doing the wide and extensive reading we talked about earlier. There are a number of strategies that young students can be taught to help them with word learning. One word learning strategy is to use the context to help with vocabulary. As mentioned earlier, this is why students who do wide and extensive reading usually have well-developed vocabularies. Whether they know it or not, they are encountering words at a higher volume and are employing some of the word learning strategies within the context of the text. Authors often provide word clues within the text. Teaching and modeling ways to look for these clues can be helpful to students in order for them to figure out unknown words using the text to help them. Meanings for unknown vocabulary can often be found in images, definitions, examples, synonyms, and antonyms that are used in the text. Let's take a closer look at each one. Images such as illustrations and photographs can often help readers understand words in a sentence. In the sentence, "Turtles lay near the riverbank," students can look at photographs to see where turtles are laying and learn that a riverbank is the land near the edge of a river. Although using the image for clues can be a very effective strategy, and one that students really cling on to, it does not always work. It is also important to point out instances where the image does not help the reader and then provide support in using another word learning strategy to help with the word. Sometimes an author provides a definition for the reader in the same sentence as the unknown word or in a sentence close by. For example, in one of her books, Fancy Nancy says, "Then I get an idea that is stupendous." The sentence immediately following says, "That's a fancy word for great." The author provides the reader with the definition for the word stupendous. Great. Examples are sometimes provided within a sentence as well in order to illustrate the unknown word. In the sentence, "She put condiments on her hot dog like ketchup, mustard, and relish," students can figure out from the examples, ketchup, mustard, and relish, what condiments are. They are the extra toppings we put on food. Synonyms are words that are the same or nearly the same. Authors often use synonyms in sentences too. In the sentence, "My brother wanted to assist my mom with the groceries, so he helped carry them in the house." The word assist can be figured out because the synonym helped is used later in the sentence. We'll talk more about synonyms later in this training. Finally, antonyms are opposites, and authors often leave clues using opposites in the text, such as in the sentence, "Unlike his timid brother, Marco was very talkative." In this context, timid means the opposite of talkative. But notice the meaning and grammatical structures students must understand in this sentence to be able to make the correlation between the opposite words. Students have to understand the contrast indicated in the word unlike. Antonyms will be addressed more in this training later, too. Although students may not be able to use each of these context-related strategies independently, introducing them to students as they arrive will help them gain an awareness and practice using them in a structured and supportive setting. Learning about how some words are put together can help with determining their meanings. Another word learning strategy is understanding morphology. Morphemes are the smallest units of meaning that make up words in a language. There are two morphemes in the word bats, bat and s. The word bat means a small furry animal that can fly, and the s indicates a plural that means that there is more than one. In the word unfairly, there are three morphemes, un, fair, and ly. Each morpheme has a meaning. Un means not, fair means impartial or honest, and ly means in a way that. So unfairly means in a way that is not honest. An understanding of morphemes can help students determine the meanings of words. Children as young as preschool begin to demonstrate morphological awareness, especially with endings such as s, ed, and ing. The standards can help determine which prefixes and suffixes are appropriate for each grade level, but there are a few prefixes and suffixes that are particularly useful to teach students because of their high utility in words. The charts show the frequency with which they occur in words that have prefixes and suffixes. You can see that teaching just a few of them can be highly useful for determining word meanings. So for example, the prefix un occurs 26% of the time in words that contain a prefix, and the suffix ing occurs 14% of the time in words that contain a suffix. Knowing just a few morphemes will help students more than 50% of the time when they encounter a prefix in a word, and more than 70% of the time when they encounter a suffix in a word. Another added benefit of teaching morphology to students is that it causes students to look more closely at words. And isn't that what we want? Although there is a whole world of root word meanings associated with morphology, standards don't really begin to address root words until second grade. This does not mean that students cannot use parts of words they know in order to figure out unknown words. For example, let's look at the word play. Students can identify and discuss how each of these words shown on the slide relates to the meaning of the word play, which they do know. Drawing students' attention to the ways meaning can be used and also determined heightens word consciousness, which, if you will remember, is the last component of an effective vocabulary program. And speaking of word consciousness and word play are the last component of an effective vocabulary program. Let's spend some time talking about some word categories. You no doubtedly are aware of these groups of words. However, I would like to spend some time thinking about each kind of word in order to unpack the implications of each type of word as they relate to vocabulary development, as well as to renew your awareness of just how powerful these words can be in terms of heightening students' word consciousness, which impacts word learning. Once students are aware of these types of words, they love to be on the lookout for them. So you may want to consider a way to document the words the class finds, such as on word walls, anchor charts, and word jars. Let's take a look at each type of word. According to the dictionary, homonyms refer to three distinct classes of words. Words that are spelled the same but have different meanings, words that sound the same but are spelled differently, and words that are spelled the same but have a different pronunciation and meaning. But do a quick search on the internet and you will see the words homonym, homophone, and homograph used interchangeably. For the purposes of this training, I will use the definitions most commonly used in books for teachers on teaching vocabulary. Homonyms are words that are pronounced and spelled alike but have different meanings. For example, bark can be the sound a dog makes, or the rough outside part of a tree. These words are sometimes called multiple meaning words, and they are everywhere. And to complicate things further, they are often used as different parts of speech, such as the word ring, the kind you put on your finger, and the sound a phone makes. Remember earlier I mentioned that Nagy observed that words with multiple meanings are the rule rather than the exception? And Bailey noted that 60 to 70% of English words have multiple meanings. Just start looking around. These words abound. These types of words can be especially confusing for our English language learners. We may assume that students understand the word trunk because we studied elephants and the parts of elephants, but what happens when they come across the word when it is being used as a part of a tree or a car? And in the case of the word trunk, it is being used as a noun in all of these instances. Think about encountering the word duck. Students may know it to be a feathered bird, but may not understand its meaning when it's used as a verb, such as in the sentence, "I had to duck so the ball wouldn't hit me." Jokes are a great vehicle to engage students in thinking about categories of words. Consider telling a couple a day and discussing what it is that makes them funny. In order to get jokes, students have to have a firm grasp on the language involved. They also have to understand the way this kind of joke works by playing on the multiple meaning of a word and the relationship of the two words. They often are funny because they play with the part of speech that the word takes, such as changing the word from being used as a noun to being used as a verb, or vice versa. You will likely need to provide substantial support with this when you first begin. However, as students learn more about language and how the jokes work, they will begin to understand on their own. I have to admit it, this was not just my students' favorite parts of our daily schedule, but it was mine too. Jokes for these kinds of words are plentiful. Just take a look at any joke book for kids. What kind of animal do you always see at a baseball game? A bat. Homophones are words that are pronounced the same but have different spellings and different meanings. For example, the words see, S-E-A, and see, S-E-E. An example of a joke for a homophone is, which days of the week are the strongest? Saturday and Sunday. The rest are weekdays. This joke plays on strong and weak as being opposites, as well as the meanings and spellings of the word week, W-E-E-K and W-E-A-K. A note about homophones. These words have been historically the focus of word study. But stop and think for a moment about the focus of such a word study. Is it mostly for reading or mostly for writing? Of course, it is mostly for writing and for students to be able to use the correctly spelled version of the word in the right place. Now think about the implications for reading. When students read homophones, the author has already selected the correct spelling of the word. He has already selected where the word is used in the sentence and provided the context for the type of the word that it is, as a noun or a verb or another part of speech. Much of the work has been done. Homonyms, which were discussed on the last slide, require more of students because they not only have to conjure up the meaning of the word, but in order to do so, they have to understand the context of the sentence and the grammar form the word is being used as. Homographs refer to words that are spelled the same but have different pronunciation and different meanings. These are also referred to as heteronyms. For example, the words wind and wind. They are both spelled the same but pronounced differently. Each has a different meaning too. Wind can be the breeze in the air, and wind can be something you do to make a toy go. Other examples include bow and bow, bass and bass, and record and record. Synonyms are words that mean the same or nearly the same. For example, bucket and pail are synonyms. Think about the importance of these words, especially for words that are more abstract. For example, students may already realize what it means to like something, but do not know the word enjoy. That example in particular is a perfect example of how the word like is very commonly used in everyday speech. However, the word enjoy is more likely to occur in text. Students already have the conceptual understanding of what it means to like something. So essentially, you are providing a more refined term for students to understand and use when teaching the word enjoy. Another idea for working with synonyms is to choose words that tend to be overused by primary students, such as good, big, and happy. Introduce and chart synonyms for the word. Follow up with practice. For example, students can describe a time when they were happy, but use one of the synonyms in their description. This could be verbal or in writing. Include having students practice creating several sentences using different synonyms. I was happy when I saw the sunflowers. I was glad when I saw the sunflowers. I was delighted when I saw the sunflowers. We are going to take a sidestep here for a minute to talk about hink pinks. These are words that rhyme or go together as the answer to a little question or riddle. They require students to think of synonyms in order to answer the riddle. For example, what do you call a black bird that is not fast? A slow crow. Do an internet search for hink pinks and you will find tons that can be used to engage your students to think about words. Antonyms are opposites. Antonyms specifically appear in the kindergarten standards. However, antonyms can be used with students in grades beyond kindergarten to help with meaning, especially for words that imply nuances. Many beginning antonym activities include pairs of words such as day, night, open, close, and up, down. But once students have a firm understanding of how antonyms relate to each other more complex words can be related as antonyms, such as allow, forbid, and bore, amuse. Seeing the opposite relationship between the words can help students understand both words better. Relate words students already know to words students may not. For example, fast and slow can be related to rapid and pokey. Onomatopoeia are fun words for kids and adults. These are words that are pronounced like the sounds they make. For example, pop or buzz. Students may be familiar with some of these words because they are made by superheroes, but there are many, many more. Although we don't usually think of these words for vocabulary development, they can play a great role in grabbing students' attention and getting them to think about words. Compound words are words that are made of two words put together. Compound words are useful to study because oftentimes the words used to form the compound words imply the meaning. For example, a bird house is a house for a bird. However, it is important for students to know that there are compound words where the meaning cannot be inferred. For example, a butterfly is not butter that can fly. There are a lot of jokes with compound words too. Why did the melon jump in the lake? It wanted to be a watermelon. The last couple kinds of words are probably not going to have a huge effect on your students' vocabularies, but they are sure to engage students in thinking about words, and they are just downright fun. Acronyms are words that are formed by the first letters of the words they stand for. For example, USA stands for United States of America. These words do not occur very frequently in primary texts, and they are not going to impact students' comprehension tremendously, but attention to them as a category of words contributes to students' word consciousness, and they are just fun. Palindromes are words that are spelled the same forward and backward. Mom is M-O-M forward, and M-O-M backward. There are a number of words in English that are spelled this way. There are even some phrases and sentences that can be put together as palindromes, such as, "Was it a car or a cat I saw?" Even some names are palindromes, like Anna or Bob. Look for palindrome names in your students in your class. Again, not earth-shattering in terms of vocabulary development, but definitely fun and heightens word consciousness. Finally, here are some miscellaneous categories of words you might want to consider drawing students' attention to. Words that are fun to say, like zippy and pudding. Mississippi and banana are words that are fun to spell. There are words with double letters like funny and silly. Kind words are always nice to collect, like please and thank you. How about words that are interesting to say, like gullible? And my daughter loves to walk around the house saying the name of the state fish of Hawaii. I'm not sure how to pronounce that one. You can look that one up. Finally, how about words that make my tongue twist? For me, the name of the Hawaii state fish also fits in that category. Or the word phenomenon. The kinds of words you can collect is limitless, and once your students get the hang of it, they will come up with some categories too. And once students are doing that, you know they are really thinking about words. Many in this next set of categories of words are specifically studied as students get into upper grades. However, they do still frequently appear in texts for primary grades, and drawing students' attention to them is a great way to grow word consciousness. Let's take a quick look at each one. Idioms have a meaning that has become accepted in common use. Idioms can sometimes be figured out by the context of the sentence, but rarely can be figured out by the meanings of the words alone, thus making them difficult for students. Idioms can be words such as bookworm, phrases such as go bananas, or expressions such as it's raining cats and dogs. There are many common idioms that primary students run across in text, such as smart cookie, a piece of cake, and a couch potato. Be aware of idioms as you run across them in text. Point them out to students so they can be aware of them and begin adding them to their vocabularies. Some terms and phrases are so commonplace to us as adults, but do your students know them? Do they know how to use them correctly? Do they know to say Merry Christmas, but not Merry Valentine's? Just something to think about. Similes are used to compare two things using the words like or as. Light as a feather means something that is very, very light, like a feather. These are fun to find and discuss in text. Metaphors are a comparison of one thing to another, but these comparisons do not use the words like or as. In the example, the sisters are being compared to peas in a pod. You is being compared to sunshine, and the girl's hair is being compared to coal. Metaphors are often used to add description to text to help the reader better visualize something. Analogies show the relationship between two things and can be useful to clarify word meanings, as well as develop meanings within the context of categories. Listed on the slide are some common relationships that students will encounter. Frames work very well for helping students place the word in the context of a sentence, as well as providing them with the grammatical context for having them provide their own sentences. A variety of sentences can usually be formed to show each relationship, and it is often useful to help students see and practice the words in a variety of ways. For example, to show the relationship between goat and kid, here are two sentences that could be formed. a baby goat is called a kid, or a kid is a baby goat. Just a quick note that item category has so many types of words that will be essential for students. Think about some of these broad categories that students need to understand: clothes, vehicles, furniture, feelings, materials, food, or the more nuanced and, yes, my favorite and always essential category, desserts. Ensuring students know these broader categories for words is very important. Work with students to identify other word relationships, particularly as they relate to particular subjects that you are studying. For example, if you are working on a science unit on animals, several different types of relationships can be identified, such as animal to body parts, animal to movement, animal to sound, and animal to environment. Personification is when human qualities are given to animals or objects. For example, describing the way a candle flame moves as dancing, or saying that the cake was calling me to eat it. Alliteration is when words that are near each other begin with the same sound. Now, at first you might wonder what alliteration has to do with vocabulary, but hang with me for a minute. Doesn't thinking about the sounds words start with get students thinking about words? And isn't that what we want when we are talking about word consciousness? Also, in addition to word consciousness, we want students to play with words. I dare you to say, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers 3 times fast. Also, if an author uses the term luscious lollipop, you can discuss why the author chose the word luscious. It begins with the same sound as lollipop, which draws attention to the words which now can be discussed. Why did the author use that word to describe lollipop? Why didn't she use the word yummy? What other words could be used to describe the lollipop? Are you thinking about words when you are answering all of these questions? Of course you are, and students will too, given the opportunity and the awareness. Hyperbole is an intentional exaggeration. I already told you 1,000 times, and I'm so hungry I could eat a horse, are 2 that younger students probably have already heard. Draw attention to the wording and the meaning of these exaggerations as you encounter them. Okay, we've talked quite a bit about word consciousness. Let's have a little fun with word play. You can, of course, find examples of many kinds of words in books, both fiction and nonfiction. But there have been so many fun books that have been specifically written around the categories of words. A list of some of my favorites are provided as a resource in a tab of this training. Of course, you are aware of word puzzles such as word searches and crossword puzzles. Even if you have younger students, these are fun to complete as a class. There are so many online resources that are available that allow you to plug in your own list of words and have a puzzle generated. There are many poems that inspire word consciousness too. Listen to this poem called The Fourth by Shel Silverstein. Oh crash, my bash, it's bang, the zang. Fourth whoosh of baroom, July, whew. That's a great one for onomatopoeia. Many riddles play with words and language. You can find many riddles that play off of the spelling of words and the multiple meaning of words. Which letter of the alphabet has the most water? C. And what word begins and ends with E but only has one letter? Envelope. Riddles can be found with a quick internet search, or you can buy books of riddles for kids too. Here's a fun way to play with words. Picture puzzles can reinforce multiple meanings that words can have. Think about how each of these images represent a word that means more than one thing. These word puzzles are fun too. Using the image provided, students have to figure out the word or sometimes the phrase being shown. The example in the slide are for sandbox, high chair, and downtown. Again, a quick internet search and you can find lots of these. 9 squares are simple puzzles that you can make that work with the definitions of words as well as spellings. The clues for how to change the word can focus on any type of word currently be studying. This 9 square focuses on antonyms. Begin with the word rug. Turn rug into the opposite of walk. Run. Now turn run into the opposite of moon. Sun. Have students go on word hunts. This could be for words they listen to or words they actually locate in a text if they are already reading. In the first example, students could look or listen for any number of types of words. For example, food words, days of the week, or I circled a number word. In the second example, you could have students search for a word the author used to mean scared. You can see that I circled the word frightened. Finally, the third example is the front cover of a book called Big Bad Bruce. Challenge students to find a word used in the title that means huge, or have students think of other words the author could have used for the word big. Discuss why the author used those words along with the character's name, Bruce. Probably because the 3 words are alliterative. Let's shift gears here from word consciousness and word play to look at one other aspect of vocabulary, you. In addition to books, which were discussed in detail earlier, the teacher is the main source for vocabulary in the classroom. Try to be more conscious of the language you use. Do you tell your students to clean up or tidy up? Do you describe the weather as very hot or sweltering? Be aware of upping your own vocabulary in order to expose your students to more sophisticated and precise words. Use the TAP strategy discussed earlier as you do. For example, you can tell your students to tidy or clean up their desks. Tell students it is sweltering outside while you are fanning yourself. Make a plan to use several words deliberately throughout the day. I like to write them on Post-it notes and put them where I can see them. If you see them, you will use them. And by the way, there are probably students in the classroom that can be a great source for words too. Be aware of drawing on students' interests and hobbies. Is one of your students a dinosaur lover? He probably owns a lot of vocabulary related to dinosaurs, like herbivore and carnivore. Capitalize on students' expertise to achieve your vocabulary goals. But of course, we don't just want students to know the meanings of words. We want them to use words in their own speaking and writing. And this requires practice. Lots of it. Think about your own classroom. Who does most of the speaking? You or students? Research shows that teachers tend to do most of the talking in classrooms. Student opportunities to talk are often quite limited. Even worse, research suggests that as students move through the grades, their opportunities for talk decreases. Traditionally, much conversation that occurs in a classroom was by the teacher asking a question, having one child respond, and then having the teacher evaluate the response. It was very easy for a lot of students to slip under the radar and never even participate that way. We are much more aware of various techniques to call on students, but we still need to be aware of how much talking we do as teachers and how much or how little students get to do. So this is where you as a teacher need to be aware of when and how words are being used in the classroom. There are many strategies for structuring student interaction. That could be a whole nother training. So for now, I'll just focus on one that is particularly useful. The 10-to-2 strategy is a good way for teachers to structure classroom time to allow for students to process information and practice verbalizing it, using the right vocabulary. 10-to-2 stands for the ratio of teacher talking to student talking. Teachers should talk for no more than 10 minutes and then allow students to process and speak to a partner or in some other group configuration for 2 minutes. You do not have to create a laundry list of questions for students to answer during that time. Of course, if you have a specific question for students to discuss, you can provide it. But it can also be as simple as asking students to explain what they learned in their own words. You will, of course, want to consider your students' needs and provide additional support during that time as well. This can be accomplished in a variety of ways, including providing sentence frames, listing vocabulary on the board, or having the stronger partner speak first. Classrooms must be a safe space for conversations, including trying vocabulary. So an environment of trust must be in place for students to feel comfortable enough to try something new without fear of embarrassment from the teacher, but especially their peers. If a safe environment is in place, pairs or small groups of students are an important and safe way for students to practice what they will say and how they will say it. This is an especially effective strategy to use before asking students to share out in a larger group. Students have time to practice, receive feedback from their partners, and revise both their ideas and the ways they will say them before speaking in front of the larger group. Also, partners or small groups provide an opportunity for a lot of students to speak, rather than just the one who raised his or her hand. Finally, before we wrap up, I want to touch briefly on vocabulary and writing. There are many things that set apart good writing, and I'm sure you will agree with me that the words students use in writing is one of them. In fact, word choice is often one of the features that occur in rubrics to evaluate writing. There are many ways you can encourage students to include interesting vocabulary in their writing. One strategy I used worked particularly well for my first graders. After I introduced a writing prompt or topic, I would be sure to include interesting words that students might use as part of our discussion. I would record these words on a sheet of chart paper for students to reference as they wrote. For example, we studied elephants on the savannah in my class. I would ask students to think of words they could use to describe an elephant. They of course would say big, and I would write the word big on the chart paper. But then I would encourage students to think of other words they could use instead of big. Synonyms, right? Of course, I tried to promote word consciousness in my students, so they would contribute words like enormous, large, huge, massive, and gigantic. These are the words I wanted my students to include in their writing. And guess what? Because I fed them the words right before they wrote, they did include them. Don't limit yourself to just one word for a writing topic. Make several charts of several words that you think students will use around the writing topic. Yes, you are prompting students now, but they will also become accustomed to using interesting words in writing, and soon they will do it all on their own. Well, we've come to the end of our training. Remember that there is a book list you can download that will give you a start on finding books related to word categories. I hope this training has reminded you of the importance of developing vocabulary in our students, reaffirmed many good things that you already do, as well as provided a few tips for how you can inspire a love of words and word learning in your students.